Welcome to your Mastermind Masterclass Guide. I'll be your host JB, and in today's video I'll be explaining exactly how to get the most out of this class. This is the next part of my Masterclass series, tailored towards getting new players familiar with this game and through the entire main story of Xenoblade X. As always, no endgame builds will be discussed throughout the duration of this video, so revisit the channel at a later date once those videos have been uploaded. Additionally, if you enjoy this content and find it useful, please consider hitting that subscribe button and notification bell, as it's free and it helps me out a ton. With all that out of the way, let's get right into the guide. The Mastermind class consists of both the raygun and knife weapon types, and is the first class we'll be talking about that goes down the bottom class route, designed for more veteran players. That doesn't mean if you're a new player, you have no hope of figuring out and using this class, but just that you need to be more aware of some of the game's finer qualities and mechanics, which by the end of this video, you will be. The class provides a huge increase to your potential stat and moderately increases your ranged attack also, but comes at the cost of reducing your maximum HP and melee attack stats, reducing your survivability and encouraging you to prioritize ranged damage. This comes together to create an incredible support focused class with a ton of useful buff and debuff effects and the potential to do a ton of damage. See what I did there? Your primary weapon for this build will be the raygun, allowing us to utilize the class's stat increases and a variety of strong offensive and supportive arts to give your party the upper hand in battle. This weapon has 11 different arts, providing a variety of debuff effects, party-wide buffs, and a pretty impressive aura to boot. It lacks the physical attribute, which isn't too detrimental, with beam and ether variants being the most common, pairing nicely with arts like gravity blast, which give you further elemental coverage. In terms of auto attacks, the rayguns are interesting, having a pretty short cooldown but moderate rate of fire and a high TP gain amount per shot but a low magazine capacity. All in all, the raygun makes for a unique weapon type which focuses on crippling enemies with debuffs before then shredding them to pieces with some strong ranged arts whilst topping up your allies with buffs. That brings us onto the knife weapon, which is one of the best, if not the best, support weapon in the entire game. It has 15 different arts, the majority of which are either green buff arts, unique purple debuff arts, with some pretty interesting effects, and a variety of auras and interesting melee arts. They can come in any attribute except beam, but due to us not really using this weapon for damage purposes, it doesn't really matter which attribute you settle for. In terms of its auto attacks, they have a super quick cooldown speed and a pretty good TP generation rate, with the only downside being that you need to be fairly close compared to other melee weapons to take advantage of it. The end result is a great weapon type that is as versatile as it has arts, being able to effectively support virtually any ranged weapon and always be an asset rather than a burden. Now for our loadout. We'll be designing what is effectively one of the better support builds for playing through the main story, while still providing a great amount of DPS that lets us chew through most of the game's bosses. To this extent, we'll want to use Smooth Recovery, Energy Source, and Gravity Cloak for this build. Smooth Recovery is one of the only healing odds in the entire game, and is super nice if you're having issues healing exclusively through soul voices, whilst also increasing your evasion, which for any build that doesn't run decoy is actually very useful despite what many people may think. Gravity Cloak may seem like a relatively niche use case, but in reality, many enemies possess a single art with this attribute, intended to be something akin to a talent art from Xenoblade 1, which would require Monado Shield, and that's kinda what this art does for us here, on top of having amazing spam potential. That leaves Energy Source, which, when used on yourself, is effectively a potential up 6 buff that is completely free to use, and is straight up incredible once we get to our TP arts and overdrive later. Moving on, we'll be running the arts Myopic Screen, Subterfuge, and Full Specs. Myopic Screen is the best purple art for this build, having 3 hits, meaning that we can generate a ton of TP during overdrive, and inflicting Blackout, lowering the enemy's evasion, accuracy, and ranged attack, which, despite ordinarily having a very short effect time, truly shines once you activate overdrive and gain both its secondary and tertiary effects, drastically amplifying boosting its effectiveness. Subterfuge is the other best purple art for this build, but can admittedly be swapped out with some of the additional arts I'll talk about momentarily based on personal preference. It does still inflict debuff resistance down, however, which is obviously very useful, and despite dealing no actual damage, technically hits the enemy 3 times, and thus restores TP that many times as well, collectively meaning that we won't be lacking for TP with both of these arts equipped during overdrive. That brings us onto full specs, which is just a general pretty nice aura, increasing our potential and ranged attack even further, but later on can get overshadowed by Yelv's unique Master Gunner aura, as without spoiling the new content, you may want to focus down being able to destroy enemy appendages. That leaves our offensive arts, which, if it wasn't obvious, will be Beam Barrage and Ether Blast. These arts have a ton of hit count, crazy high damage capability, and Ether Blast specifically scales off of your potential stat, which with all of the other buffs we've added to it so far, will make it deal some insane amounts of damage. As for some other arts that you may want to consider, Bahamut Wave is a brand new art that's been introduced to this game, and like all the other new arts so far, its effect is nutty and absolutely broken. Screamer is an interesting debuff art, inflicting sleep on the enemy, which when paired with some specific skills, can effectively recreate topper locking from Xenoblade 1. Brainjack and Servant Sacrifice work hand in hand if you want to play a sort of monster tamer playstyle, allowing you to convert enemies to your side and have them fight for you, but doesn't work on tyrants and bosses. And finally, Clarity Ray and Beam Bomber, 2 arts that you unlock via a specific character's affinity missions, which you obtain pretty late into the game, but are still some of the best arts to use for this class. I'll also take the time to quickly mention that you should not run Absorber Skin, despite its effect looking fairly appealing. The reason being that the barrier effect scales off of the player's maximum HP, which you may recall is lowered when running this particular class, making the effect not all that effective. So this is the one art that I would avoid in most cases. That brings us onto the skills, and ooh boy does the Mastermind tree have some incredible skills. 2 of the absolute best you can run a Secondary Accelerator and Inner Search, increasing your potential stat even higher and drastically reducing your secondary and tertiary cooldowns, which is incredible during overdrive to get those extra bonus effects off consistently, and thus no longer require you to dedicate your quick recast meter to it. Other skills that you can use then include High Tension, providing a source to increase your maximum TP, and Tactical Analyst, making it even easier to inflict your debuffs onto your enemies and keep them crippled. The final skill I then need to mention is Core Crusher, the skill that breaks the endgame and was a fundamental part of any build in the original. This is another independent modifier which at max level increases all of your damage by an additional 150%, with the only limitation being that it only affects ether attribute attacks and prevents you from damaging appendages. I'm not going to tell you not to use this skill, but I will warn you once again, in the new content, destroying enemy appendages is an important aspect of defeating some of the new enemies, and using and focusing this skill will hinder you from doing just that. Finally, that brings us onto the gear for this build, and you may be getting sick of hearing this from me by now, but you should totally make sure you have some Appendage Crusher applied. The easiest sources to obtain this effect is from Satie's side quest mission, unlocked during chapter 3, and is applied to the eye patch you get as a reward, and any uniform piece of gear, the reward for completing Elma's first affinity mission, We Were Soldiers, as you should have enough TP capacity already with High Tension applied. As for its effect, Appendage Crusher is yet another independent modifier that helps increase your damage when targeting enemy appendages. In simple terms, each appendage has a hardness tier, which varies between positive and -5, with 0 being neutral standard damage output. And what Appendage Crusher does is soften the appendage by 1 tier for each one applied. This also stacks with Core Crusher, leading to absurd amounts of damage, and due to you no longer being able to break the appendage, the effect and bonuses granted become infinite. assuming one of your other party members doesn't break it for you. Aside from this, I'll once again recommend crafting some resistance reducer 5 augments and applying them where possible, as this will further raise your chances of applying debuffs to the enemy, and if you need some of the materials, just press Y, and the game will show you exactly where and what you need to hunt to get the materials necessary. That brings us onto today's demonstration, where we'll be taking advantage of this class's exceedingly high potential stat to hopefully unleash some pretty high damage numbers. As always, priority number 1 when activating Overdrive should be building up the counter as quickly as possible. That's why I'll immediately use one of my green arts and segue it straight into Beam Barrage to take advantage of the double Overdrive count bonus by going from a green into a yellow art. That said, we don't want to start using our TP right now, so instead of using Ether Blast, either perform the same combo again by using Quick Recast to bring Beam Barrage off cooldown, or go straight into Myopic Screen, which will help build both the counter and restore some TP to us. That's because during Overdrive, Purple Arts will grant you 10 TP multiplied by whatever the Overdrive counter is currently at, and due to our Purple Arts both having 3 hits, this effect will activate 3 times in a row, generating a ton of TP. From here, continuously use your green arts to extend the Overdrive timer, as these have a similar effect, instead increasing the timer by 0.05 seconds multiplied by the Overdrive counter, and restore your TP with either Myopic Screen or Subterfuge. And if you do all that correctly, you should end up with another 3000 TP before the initial 25 seconds is up, letting you reactivate Overdrive, and this is where the fun begins. Your hit count should now be high enough to begin setting yourself up to start dealing massive amounts of damage with Ether Blast, so make sure you're prepared by activating your aura and getting a potential up buff via your energy source art, and also remember that there's a 15% chance that the effect will rank up to a potential up 6 each time you reapply the level 5 buff onto yourself. This is actually an inherent effect of all buffs and debuffs within this game, and so can also be utilized on your debuff arts to rank them up even further. Now that you're reaching truly absurd amounts of potential, let Ether Blast rip, and with all your additional modifiers increasing your damage, you should see the enemy health bar just disappear, and then now it's simply a matter of rinsing and repeating, using your green arts to extend the Overdrive timer, your purple arts to cripple your enemy and restore all your TP, and your yellow arts to keep consistently pushing the damage straight down the enemy's throat. It's also worth mentioning that you may find this build slower initially compared to some of the others I've discussed thus far, due to the sheer number of buff effects via knife which require you to input an additional command to select which ally you want to target. You can either run like me, being super selfish and just spamming the button so that all of the effects only apply to yourself, or take the time to spread your effects amongst your allies, but like I said, this may overall slow down your Overdrive process in the long run. I should also point out in all of this footage that I am not using Ether attribute weapons. This means that only my Ether Blast art is actually taking advantage of the Core Crusher bonus. The reason being, honestly, I kill things too quickly if everything's Ether attribute, and I'll have no footage to show you. So yeah. Enjoy! And with that, you should pretty much be able to take on Mira using the Mastermind class, which brings us to the end of this masterclass guide. I hope that you found this guide useful as always, and that you've enjoyed it, on top of helping you appreciate the mechanics of Xenoblade X that little bit more. If it has, I'd once again appreciate it if you'd consider clicking that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future guides within the masterclass series and all of the other exciting Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition content that I plan on bringing you all very soon. I thank you all for watching though, and I'll catch you in the next one. This is JB, signing off.